Well, welcome everybody. So glad you could join us today. Welcome to this webinar. The, the topic today is leading with both sides of the brain, practical ways to engage employees' energy, passion, and creativity. I'm your host, Martin Ramsey, and among the many hats that I wear, I'm the Chief Learning and Technology Officer at Leaders Ought to Know. This webinar is brought to you by Leaders Ought to Know, and many of you on the webinar today are actually alumni of that Leaders Ought to Know initiative, and we really appreciate you joining us today. Others of you are online to check us out. You may want to know about today's topic, but you may also be curious about Leaders Ought to Know. So let me give you a quick description. Leaders Ought to Know is a comprehensive initiative that provides corporate leadership training solutions. Some of those components include training videos, integrated weekly learning activities, learning communities, face-to-face workshops, and much more. I'm sure that some of the alumni who are online today would be willing to share the benefits they've received in their own leadership development journey with Leaders Ought to Know. But let's talk about the topic at hand. Today's topic, leading from both sides of the brain, is about a challenge that many leaders actually face, motivating people. In fact, in our work with Leaders Ought to Know, many of you have told us again and again that motivating people is one of your biggest challenges. And today we're going to deal directly with that issue. And I can promise you this is not going to be a simplistic feel-good chat. We're after real tangible results backed up by research and science. And our guest who's going to tell us about that is no less than employee engagement expert Paul Hare. So welcome, Paul.
Thank you, Martin. Very happy to be here. Welcome everybody from around the country. And this should hopefully be a kind of a fun, enlightening session. I wish it was in a classroom where we could interact more, but we are going to have a little bit of interaction. We're going to have a poll later on where we can ask you what you think. And this is near and dear to my heart. I've been studying human motivation and leadership for over 35 years, and I think I have a pretty good idea what that human motivational engine looks like, and we'll kind of talk about that today.
Exactly. When I first met you, Paul, you said, wouldn't it be great if employees came with a user guide? And I thought that was a great statement. Then we'd know how to lead, motivate, and engage employees. Now, in getting to know you, Paul, I've realized that's really what you've been doing is sort of working on the missing manual. Paul is the author of the critically acclaimed book, Primal Management. You can see a picture of it on the screen. The subtitle, I think, tells you a lot, Unraveling the Secrets of Human Nature to Drive High Performance. And I can attest to you that it does just that. So, Paul, when I asked you for a title of this webinar, you suggested leading from both sides of the brain. So let's start by asking a fundamental question. What are the differences between left brain thinking and right brain thinking?
And, well, Martin, I think probably everybody has heard about, left brain, right brain, and the difference between them. It's really fascinating research. A lot of the cool findings come out of split brain patients, people who have suffered from seizures, and they actually separate the two sides of the brain, and then they can actually interrogate each side of the brain separately and find out what they can do and what they do best. And another source of data comes from people who have had massive left brain strokes, where the left brain is pretty much shut down by a stroke, and then they can observe what that does to the person's abilities and behavior. The most fascinating of these, which I hope you'll look up, is an interview that Oprah Winfrey did with a researcher, a neuroscientist, who had a devastating left side stroke. And since she's a neuroscientist, she thought it was really cool that she was having the stroke and could firsthand see what happens when the left side of the brain is shut down. And I don't want to go into the whole story, but it's a very fascinating story, and it really illustrates that we do have these two sides of the brain. They do different things, and they're both necessary for our survival. But the left brain is you and me. My left brain is talking to you right now.
Mm-hmm.
Your left brain is listening to me right now, because that's the chatty side of the brain. It's the verbal, analytical, rational, sequential, planning side of the brain, and that's really what we associate with our conscious mind. That's it. That's us. And then we have this mysterious, subtle right side helper, and that is not as obvious. It's sort of on the edge of our conscious awareness. It helps us, but it's not the focus of our attention. It's sort of like a a sidekick who's kind of sits in the wings and helps us as needed. And so that we know much less about, and that's the area I'm most interested, because it's highly involved in emotional processing. So the right side of the brain deals more in emotions, interpreting emotions of others, responding to facial features and emotional expression in the face. And really what we're going to focus on today is not just the right side of the brain, but specifically the emotional aspect of the right side of the brain.
Okay.
And
Yeah. Paul, my guess is that most people on the call today would say, okay, you're getting a little squishy for me. The left side of the brain, that's the logical get things done side. It's more important for running a successful business, right? Do they have that right?
well, it's that logical left side of the brain without the right side of the brain does nothing. It can plan but doesn't have the motivational spark to implement those plans. So no, you need the right side of the brain because it's what gets you motivated, gets you up in the morning, gets you to care about your work, care about your coworkers, care about getting the job done. So no, we don't function well with just the left side of the brain. That's the Mr. Spock myth.
Right.
And we know what happens if you shut down the emotional side of the brain, because that happened in lobotomy operations. And the people who had lobotomy operations had extreme emotions, and they found a part of the brain that they could damage with an ice pick of all things. And when they damaged that part of the brain, the person calmed down, and these emotions went away, and it did not affect logic. It did not affect IQ. The person could still talk rationally, but that human being without those emotional drivers was happy to sit all day staring out the window doing absolutely nothing. The left side of the brain would plan things to do but would not carry out those plans. It lacked the motivational spark to implement the plans. So that's the key difference, is that we need both sides of the brain, and we need both sides of the brain in business. That's important as well.
Okay. So give me a characteristic of the right side of the brain. I mean, what's your thinking about that in terms of business?
In terms of business, the right side of the brain is involved in creativity. I think most companies want their employees to be creative. It's involved in deep insights. It's involved in imagination. It's sort of the visual side of the brain, and most importantly, it's involved in emotions. And that's what gets us going. That's what, if you have a logical strategy for the future, but you don't have the motivation to implement that strategy, the strategy is useless. So you need that right brain engine, and that's why this next picture we show the right brain as the engine that drives performance. And it's a very apt analogy, because feelings and emotions are the forces that move us, and they emanate from this kind of right brain emotional engine. And in my book, I talk about this engine as having 5 cylinders. There's 5 motivational systems wired into the brain, and if we can turn on those systems, we get the best out of people, and we tap into their energy and creativity. And if we don't understand that engine, we don't tap into those cylinders, then we get the worst out of people. And today we're going
to. Sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say we're not going to talk about all 5 of those motivational drivers today. We're going to talk about one of them, the most important one.
Right. And so it sort of as a lead into that, it seems to me that a lot of folks have it wrong. I mean, I've been in business for 35 years now, and we tend to focus on sort of the left brain things. Give me some examples of left brain management as opposed to right brain management. If you were going to grade our performance as business people, I'm thinking, well, I don't know. I'd like to know what you think.
Right. Well, let's go to the next slide.
Left brain versus right brain. Yeah.
Let's take a look at the next slide, and I'll address that. Martin, can you advance the slide?
It's
There we
on.
go.
Hmm.
Okay, so this is the left brain again is logical, sequential, rational, analytical, and we have lots of business processes that work harmoniously with the left brain. We have Lean and Six Sigma, total quality management. These are rational systems for kind of making a company efficient
Hmm.
and to reduce costs, reduce errors, and we're really good at this. We're very efficient. We've been working on efficiency for 100 years very diligently, and I would give corporations an A plus for rational left brain processes. And I'm sure everybody in their workplace has some of these systems installed, and your business is probably 80 to 90 to 95% efficient on the left side processes. You're probably pretty darn efficient. If you did another sort of Lean or Six Sigma program, you might get another 3 or 4% productivity out of people, and that's not a lot. You're not going to get a lot of bang for your buck because we're already good at these things. Now, to contrast that, what about this emotional right brain process? What have we done to tap into that human engine? And that's a much different story, and that's where we're going to focus today. We're not going to focus on the right brain, on the left brain processes, because we're already good at that. What we're going to focus on are these emotional right brain processes, which we're not so good at. And we're not good at it because we ignored emotions for the last 100 years. Scientists said emotions are too hard to study, they're too internal, there's no way to study them in a really scientific way, so we defaulted to kind of a behaviorist approach to human behavior. Let's not worry about what's going on inside of people's heads. Let's not worry about their feelings and emotions. We'll just look at how they behave. And when they behave the way we want, we give them a cookie. And when they behave the way we don't want, we give them a smack on the rump. And that's been our very simplistic, disrespectful approach to motivating people for the last 100 years. And I think it's highly destructive. It treats human beings like lab rats, and so that's where we're coming from. We're coming from this cold-hearted, money and fear approach. If you do what I want, I give you money. If you don't do what I want, you're fired. And we've been on the wrong path for 100 years. And fortunately, over the last 15 years or so, we've started to get our act together and start to figure out a better way to motivate people other than this very simplistic behaviorist approach.
Paul, I got to tell you a story.
Sure.
In one of the Leaders Ought to Know learning activities talks about the Renfro Valley chicken. There's a chicken in Renfro Valley, which some folks who have been around for a long time will recognize as a sort of a landmark country music site from probably the 20s, 30s, and farther than that. But the Renfro Valley chicken will play tic-tac-toe with you. And I kid you not, you can put a quarter in and it'll play tic-tac-toe. And of course, B.F. Skinner told them how to train that chicken. And I keep saying to people, but you are not a Renfro Valley chicken. People are more complicated than that.
Right. And that's my main complaint with our current process for motivating people. It's just very stilted, artificial. It does not take into account the richness of human motivation, and we're just not tapping into that human engine very well at all. Fortunately,
so you give people an F on that one, I guess.
Yeah, we get a big stinking F. But let's go back to this other side just a second.
Okay.
You got a little bit quick on the draw there, Martin.
Sorry, my friend.
But I wanted to give the good news. So the bad news is we stink at motivating people. The good news is that we're heading in the right direction because there's a revolution occurring in the brain sciences. We have new tools that can look inside the brain and see how, what parts of the brain are active during different tasks. And we're learning a lot more about emotions. And it went from being the least important part of the scientific community to one of the very most important. And there's revolutionary findings coming out every day. And here's where we're headed now. Dan Goleman wrote about emotional intelligence, and he was a writer for the New York Times who wrote a column in the Tuesday Science section, which I always read. And he was noticing this amazing research coming out of the brain scanning labs, and he decided boy, this is important stuff. So he decided to kind of summarize all that new research, all that new neuroscience, and put it under the banner of emotional intelligence. And so that was a big step in the right direction, because before Goleman's book, you'd get laughed at if you mentioned the word emotions in a business setting. It was so uncool, unmacho, so soft, so touchy-feely, hand-holdy. You know, it just had a enormously bad reputation. And Goleman sort of started the process of rehabilitating the concept that emotions are not soft and irrelevant. They're the forces that move us, and if we ignore them, it's going to affect our business in a big way. And so kudos to Goleman. If Dan's out there, golly, I love you, man. Keep it up. Then there's the positive psychologists like Maslow and Seligman, and I can't even pronounce this guy's name, but Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi or something like that. But he came up with the flow concept. But anyway, so the positive psychologists are on the right track. They understand that emotions are important, particularly positive emotions. And then the coup de grace here is the employee engagement movement, which really started with the Gallup organization. And they used a very scientific, statistical approach to figure out what's important to employees. And they started with a list of like 2,000 questions. And then they kept kind of whittling those questions down by which questions actually seem to have a positive impact on business performance. And they ended up with 12 questions, which is now called the Gallup Q12 survey, of 12 questions that actually seem to drive business performance. And all 12 of them have to do with emotions. These questions measure basically the emotional connection between an employee and their employer. And so that really got the business world's attention, because companies that score high in employee engagement are more, people work better, faster, smarter, and are more collaborative, and those companies do better, and they perform better. So we're now at a point where all the left brain thinkers have gotten a religion in a sense, and they're starting to say, hey, we were kind of all wet for the last 100 years, making fun of emotions, when actually they're absolutely critical to the long-term sustainable performance of a company. So I put down here that we can go to the next slide now. So I'm stating here that we get an F, and the reason I say we get an F is because as of this year, only 27% of employees report caring about their work. And so the Gallup organization figured out what that's costing us in terms of lost productivity, and it comes out to, a couple $1 trillion in lost productivity by not getting this motivational part right. We're starting to do the right things. We're starting to go on the right track. We're starting to pay attention to these things, but we're not quite there. So my question for our first poll is, to what degree, we're going to take a little poll here where you get to vote, and that is, is your organization using any of these right brain processes in a serious way? And what I mean by that is, are you doing anything in the area of emotional intelligence? Are you doing anything in the area of positive psychology? Are you doing anything in the area of employee engagement? And let's include in that, are you doing anything in the area of servant leadership? Those are 4 trends that are in our culture now. They're very prominent. Almost every company does a employee engagement survey, at least the bigger ones do. And how about your company? I'd just like to know, is your company paying attention to kind of managing the right side of the brain and having a process to tap into that human engine?
And the votes are coming in, Paul. You tell me when you're ready to shut it down, but we've got a lot of votes coming in. This is great, folks. Go ahead and click the button and let us know what you think here.
That's great.
You'll be very interested in the results, though, Paul. I can see how it's going.
Well, I think we have a rather stilted subset of people here, probably people who are already pretty enlightened, pretty interested in the brain and how it works, and interested in tapping into the potential of their organizations.
Right.
So
I'll go ahead and shut it off and let you see what the results look like.
Okay.
Oh, I don't know that I can show you the results, but oh, yes, I can share the results. There we go. So it was very evenly matched watching the votes come in.
I
The
don't
folks,
see
as you
the
say.
I don't see the results.
Oh, sorry. I'm sorry, Paul. You probably don't. 53% said yes, 47% said no. Almost
Okay.
evenly split. Probably
All
within
right.
the statistical realm of error.
Okay. Well, for you, you yes people, keep it up. You're on the right track. For the no people, you need to pay really close attention to this talk, because now we're going to get into the good stuff of what do you do? How do you tap into this engine? What specifically does a leader do to turn on the motivational side of your
Right.
business and
So let
supercharge
me
it?
let's for the folks who answered no, and as you say, I think that the people that are on this webinar are probably more intrigued by this than some of their colleagues might be. But in general, I hope most of us would probably agree that we generally stink at this sort of thing. So why are we so bad at understanding this? Like, why are we so bad at tapping into the energy and creativity of the right brain?
Well, there's a very good answer to that. So why don't we go to the next slide, and I'll try to
Yeah.
explain why we're so bad at this and why we're so left brain in our approach to management. Um, so could you advance the slide, Martin?
It's coming. I
Okay.
can tell there's a lag. I need to anticipate when you want the next slide.
Okay, there we go. All right, so what's this about? We got a picture of an iceberg, and as you know, icebergs float in a way that only, I think, 10% or 9% of the ice shows up above the waterline, and then the other 91% is beneath the waterline. And this iceberg is meant to represent emotions. And even the word emotions has a negative connotation. This would be another good poll question, is when you hear the word emotions, does it bring in positive thoughts or negative thoughts? And
I'll set that poll up, Paul, and you can continue talking.
all right. Well, I'm not going to tell you what I think, but we'll see if the poll comes out the way I expect. Now here's the deal. The part of the emotional iceberg we see are the visible, dynamic, ballistic, angry emotions. Anger, fear, rage, jealousy. Those are the emotions that actually come to the surface, and we can see them. They disrupt our workplaces. They disrupt our home lives. They disrupt everything. And those are the emotions that we typically associate with the word emotion, and that's why the word emotion has such a bad brand image. And that's a really big problem, because there's a much bigger story to tell here, and that's the part of the emotional iceberg beneath the waterline. And that's the part that my book covers. And that part of the emotional system is absolutely vital for our survival. There's nothing soft about it. It gets us up in the morning. It makes us care about our friends and family, care about our work, makes us strive to become masterful, competent workers. It motivates us to have strong relationships with people and to collaborate with people. And if we turned all of those 5 emotional systems off, the part below the waterline, we absolutely wouldn't even get out of bed in the morning. Those are
So
the
let's launch
productive.
that. Let's launch
Okay.
that poll and just see what people think when they hear the term emotion. If you're being honest with yourself, do you see it as a negative term or a positive term? Oh, people are being very honest with us, Paul.
Okay.
Okay, we've got a lot of votes in here. Let's let people see the results. So it's 68% negative, Paul.
Okay.
32% positive.
All right.
Doesn't
Well,
surprise you?
does not surprise me. I thought it would be even more negative, but that's in the right direction from my hypothesis.
Remember, Paul, we attract a very good class of people here at Leaders Ought to Know.
Well, that's great, because it's boring if everybody agrees with me. It'd be more fun to kind of have some debate here and so forth. So anyway, let's talk about the part below the waterline a little bit more. This part of the brain is so subtle that we're barely even aware of these emotions. They're on the edge of conscious awareness, but they're still really important to us. And if you want to know how did we get so screwed up in terms of how we manage human beings, it's because we didn't even know this stuff existed. This is really new science. We're really just now finding out how important emotions are in our everyday lives. And I experienced this directly. I absolutely was exposed to this left brain bias in the academic community because I started a PhD in educational psychology. After one semester, I met with my thesis advisor, and I wanted to ask him, discuss with him what my thesis topic would be. And I said, I want to study the relationship between emotions and academic achievement. And he looked at me like I had just slapped him across the face. He just said, "You cannot do your thesis on emotions. That would be career suicide because we are cognitive psychologists. We view the brain as a computer-like mechanism, and we have no way to factor emotions into our system. We don't think emotions are important, and some of us don't even believe they exist." And,
wow.
And at that point, I just looked at him, I shook my head, and I said, well, you know what? I'm out of here because I think you have the most wrong-headed view of emotions imaginable. And I think you guys are what's wrong with modern education because emotions are the forces that move us. And if we turn them off, we wouldn't get anything done. They're vitally important, and I just can't, I don't want anything to do with this department because you're just so backward and wrong-headed. And fortunately, I wrote my book, all this new science came into play, and I was able to, kind of thumb my nose at that professor. I mean, he was a good professor, but just heading in the wrong direction on emotions. And some of these cognitive psychologists have now apologized for their wrong-headedness because when they were faced with the latest neuroscience, it was clear that emotions are running the show. They're not soft, they're not irrelevant, they're vital to our survival, and if you shut them off, you'd be dead. How soft is that? And in the business world, if you shut them off, nobody does anything. Nobody cares about anything. You have to drag people into work. And so let's reboot on the idea of emotions, and let's forget about the top part of the iceberg where the angry emotions are, and let's focus on the subtle, productive emotions that make people want to work hard, and that's the part below the waterline. So let's focus there, and that's we're basically going to try to rehabilitate how you think about emotions.
Okay, makes sense. So I know you and I have talked, Paul, about the idea that we're conscious of our left brains, but the right brain is really the engine, as you showed in the earlier slide, that's sort of driving things. But how does it feel that like the emotions are actually, well, what's our relationship there? What's the sense we have about our emotions?
Well, in some cases, like people who are very left-brained, they have no sense of their own emotional reactions nor the feelings and emotions and needs of the people around them. So a highly left-brained person is just going to be clueless to emotions. That's just not going to enter their thought process. And I've met people like this. One fellow I had dinner with, very successful business person, kind of a finance type person, and he said, I treat my employees like pawns on a chessboard.
I've heard that.
And I said, well, you mean you don't really care about them? You just kind of treat them as things? And he goes, yep, that's how I think of them. And I said, well, what about your family? You don't think of your family as pawns on a chessboard. And there was a bit of a pause, and he goes, oh, yes, I do.
Wow.
And so there was an example of a very left-brained manager who just didn't understand this emotional aspect in any sense. He had been divorced 3 times, by the way. His employees hated him, and he was eventually asked to leave.
Should we do a survey that says anybody surprised by that?
Well, I'm sure everyone's probably run into somebody like this who's just a very left-brain dominant person who doesn't understand the importance of this emotional aspect.
So even in somebody like that, the left brain thinks it's in charge, but it's really not? Is that a true statement?
Yeah, why don't we click on the next slide. So here's a little visual that shows why we're so clueless about emotions. It's because the left brain is dominant. The left brain doesn't realize that it's actually a puppet dancing on emotional strings. That emotions drive our behavior because they are all about survival. They are the proxies for our basic survival needs. And unfortunately, the left brain is so arrogant and preoccupied with itself, it doesn't even realize that it's dancing to the beat of this emotional puppeteer. And that's really what we're faced with. We were faced with a business culture that has been arrogantly left-brained, not realizing that there's a system that's actually regulating our survival that it's completely unaware of. And so if we're puppets on strings, we ought to know how what the puppeteer's up to and how those strings work in order to kind of get the best out of people. So this is
right.
just
So what would a process look like if I'm in business? How do I tap into that? How do I get to the puppeteer rather than the puppet?
And that's what my whole book is about, basically. And the process to get to that kind of understanding of emotions is going to be a different type of process than what we're familiar with in the business community.
Right.
And the best way to characterize what this process is like is to have the following thought in your head, and that is that human beings have survived for hundreds of thousands of years in every ecosystem on the planet, and we've done it without corporations, without rules, regulations, fear of being fired. We have a sophisticated survival mechanism, and I'm going to call it the cultural operating system. And that system is way more sophisticated than anything you and I or the HR department will ever be able to dream up. And to turn on this motivational engine, we've got to tap into that cultural operating system. We have to turn that system on. Once that happens, most of the rest of the things happen organically. And one way to think about it is you can either run your company by sort of coercing people to do their jobs with lots of structure, oversight, systems of control, rules, regulations, fear of being fired, and money. I call that the artificial or left-brained way of running a company and motivating people. Or you can create a connected tribe of human beings and turn on this natural operating system, and your life will be much easier. Work will get done much more organically and naturally. People will enjoy what they're doing. They'll be trustworthy, energetic, creative. And so you can either try the artificial way, which is probably 95 or 98% of companies are managing the motivation through a very coercive approach, or you can take a shot at turning on this cultural operating system. And that's really the way human beings are designed. We're a highly social species. We're supposed to operate in tightly knit groups. And I think that's the better way to go. It's more natural, it's more productive, it's more mentally healthy.
So let me make sure that I'm clear on this, Paul. You're saying that this cultural operating system is something that everybody's got, and it's almost like the engine is a powerful engine and it's already running, and we are sort of ignoring that and not tapping into it, whereas if we were to think in terms of that and tapped into that and aligned with that, we would be so much more successful. Is that a fair?
We'd be just wildly more successful. And later we'll point to some companies that have turned on this cultural system, and it's not a big deal to double productivity, double profitability. That's just a piece of cake, because we're so bad at this that if we even do it halfway decent, we can have huge gains in our business. And so that's kind of why you should pay attention to this, is because we're so bad at it, there's a lot of room for improvement. And you don't have to get it perfect. You just have to kind of start on the right path and start being a little less left-brained, a little more socially oriented, and then you can have these really spectacular results.
Okay, so you've made a good case scientifically why this is really there, and because I find myself even thinking as you're talking, Paul, ooh, that's kind of squishy. I mean, I worked a lot with Saturn Corporation, and Saturn was sort of seen as kind of a soft and squishy kind of company, but Saturn in its day achieved some pretty remarkable results, kind of turned the automobile industry upside down. But what are some things, how do you go about creating this kind of, you talked about a close-knit group, a sort of I think you used the word tribe. How do you go about turning that on?
Well, most companies, they call themselves, they talk about corporate culture, they talk about their mission and so forth. And by and large, that's a misnomer. It's a false statement, because what they call culture is really a set of rules and regulations set up by the executive team, a group of experts who are telling everyone, you're gonna behave this way, and that's our culture. Well, no,
right.
No, that's not a culture. Culture comes from the people, from the consensus of the employees saying, this is what we believe in, this is what we are motivated by. You cannot dictate culture. Culture comes from the group, comes from the people. And most corporations don't even qualify as a social group. They're a bunch of people who show up in the same building every day. They don't care about one another. They just go through the motions. And Gallup has done studies of this, and they found that only 20% of employees report having any relationships in the workplace, any meaningful friends or relationships in the workplace. So, I use the analogy that most workplaces are like a cup full of marbles, but the marbles aren't connected. And if you lift the cup, the marbles would scatter because they're not a social group. They're not a tribe. They're not a group at all. So if you don't have a group, guess what? You don't have a culture. A culture comes with a connected group of people who have close relationships. And the slide that you just put on is really important because it shows the 3 ways that human beings can interact with one another. And I don't think there's more than 3 ways. I think there's just 3 fundamental ways that one human being can relate to another. And those are as enemies. You're my enemy and I hate you and I'm going to work to fight and hurt you. We can relate to one another as trading partners in a cool transactional mode, meaning I'll give you this and in return you give me money. For your money I'll give you a certain amount of work, but no more. I don't care about you as a person, you don't care about me as a person, we're just having a cool-headed transaction. And that's, so I call those people, impersonal trading partners. And then the final way that human beings can relate to one another is as tribe mates or allies, where I've invested in you, I value you, and you value me, and we're going to help each other, we're going to work as a team. And that's sort of like in the Marines, the no man left behind idea. We're going to work as a group, and we're going to take care of each other, we're going to have each other's back. And if we have that ally approach, then we have a group, then we have a tribe, and then we turn on the cultural operating system. But if we have a company made of enemies and trading partners, which most companies are, according to Gallup, 17% of our employees are our enemies. They call them actively disengaged, and they work against the company's interests. 59% of employees are trading partners. They're in it just for the money. You pay me money, I'll give you some work, but no, I don't care about you. And if anything is outside of my job description, I don't care about it, I'm not going to do it. If there's a fire starting in a trash can, I'm not going to put it out because it's not in my job description. I don't really care if this place burns down. So an impersonal trading partner, and then you have the allies who really believe in you, really care about you, and will go beyond the call of duty. And that's what Gallup calls engaged employees. And so obviously a company composed of enemies is not going to do well because your employees are going to sabotage you at every turn, so that's not a viable way to run a company. Employees as trading partners, well, that kind of works. That's what we've been doing for the last 100 years, is kind of impersonal. I don't care about you and you don't care about me, but we'll work together as it's convenient. And that's where we are today, and that's why only 27% of employees report caring about their work, because everybody else is just kind of in it for the money, or actually dislike the company.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's why we got the F, because only 27% of our employees are allies. And what we need to do is get the enemies and trading partners to become allies. So that's what we're trying to do. And if we achieve that, guess what? We're going to be wildly more effective, wildly more innovative, wildly more financially successful. People will want to work at this company because it's a gas to work at this company. You attract and retain the top talent, and your customers have a good experience because the employees they have a good attitude, and they get their job.
Believers.
They're believers. They get the job done better, faster, smarter, and that reflects on the customer experience. So, I think a good business starts with the employees. You got to get the employees thinking the right way, having good motivation, having a good experience, and having good relationships, and that's where sustainable businesses start. So that doesn't start with the customer; it starts with the employee. Employee engagement drives customer engagement, and customer engagement drives performance.
I like the model, Paul. This really makes a lot of sense to me, because, as you know, I work with a lot of different organizations, and so often there is this adversarial relationship within the group, and it's almost amusing that sort of employers seem just bound and determined to make life as difficult as they can for their employees, and employees seem determined to undermine their employers and bite the very hand that feeds them. They're clearly enemies. And then, as you say, my anecdotal data backs up exactly what you're saying, that most folks are trading partners. I'm thinking of Maslow's hierarchy now. Another thing we touch on in Leaders Ought to Know is, if you're sort of at the bottom of the hierarchy, it's a transaction. Pay me and I'll come to work. Don't pay me, I won't. Instead of a true belief and buy-in. So yeah, I'm with you on this. This makes sense. So if we're trying to move people forward, how do we go about doing that? How do we create these allies?
Okay, well that's the fun part. So now let's talk about what do we do to fix this? How do we move people from enemy and trading partner to allies? And if we could maybe go to the next slide.
Yep. It's there.
Basically, I'm giving you all permission to make business personal, that you take a personal interest in your people, you mentor them, you take an interest in their lives, both inside and outside the company, you care for them, you mentor them, you coach them, you create authentic relationships between your employees and between yourself and your employees and the employees themselves, and you have to willingly and enthusiastically invest in one another. And if you do these things, which sounds like a whole lot of work, but if you do this, kind of turn your employees into your projects, you will create these important bonds. You'll turn on that cultural operating system, and over the long haul, your life will get so much easier, because people are going to do the right thing because they want to do the right thing. They'll do the right thing without you having to tell them. They'll just be more proactive, and they'll want to please you. They'll want to pay back their trusted mentor and coach by doing good work. That's what motivates people in the workplace, is you want to impress the people who you care about. And if you care about your supervisor, you care about your coworkers, you don't want to let the tribe down, because if you do, you feel nature's form of accountability, which is shame. And so this natural operating system has teeth to it. When you do good work for the tribe, your self-esteem ratchets up. You feel good, strong, confident. You walk tall, feel proud. And when you let the tribe down, you feel low self-esteem, shame, and at the end point, depressed. And so this is not a soft system. This natural cultural operating system, it has teeth to it. And those are very powerful teeth. And people will work really hard to feel high self-esteem, and they'll work really hard not to feel low self-esteem. But none of this works unless you have this interpersonal, kind of relationship with people.
And Paul, the kinds of things that are on the screen right now, I heartily endorse this. This makes great sense to me, and I've recommended this kind of approach. I haven't used exactly these words, but it makes a lot of sense to me. But I know that it takes a long time to do. And the other thing that I've seen is sometimes it's not. Can I say this genuine? That it's sort of like manipulative. If I treat you nice today, then you'll do good work for me tomorrow, and that sounds a lot like a transaction again. So it's
Yeah,
deeper
no,
than that, is it not?
yeah, it cannot be manipulative. It has to be heartfelt. You really want to help people and get satisfaction from helping people and developing people. If it's done in a manipulative way, well, fortunately, human beings have wonderful bullshit detectors wired into the brain, and that will quickly be detected, and then you're right. Then you're right back into the transactional mode. You really
Right.
have to have a sense of character, a sense of wanting to help people, and that never enters the business discussion. It really needs to, because that's what makes great companies, is when
And
everyone.
so it makes me think that it comes back around to I got to do some introspection. Do I really care, or do I want to manipulate people? And if I want to manipulate people, perhaps I need to work on myself.
Yeah, absolutely, because if our goal as a manager is to kind of win the lottery and then retire, and that's what we're after, well, that's a pretty childish goal.
Mm-hmm.
I think a better goal is to help people achieve their best and take pleasure from their successes as well as your own successes, and make the focus on helping people and the focus off of winning the lottery and retiring early, because guess what? You win the lottery, you retire early, about 2 years later you're dead. Human
That's
beings
right.
are made to work and strive, and we're not made to just shut down and live in a condo and play
Right.
golf every day. You're not going to be happy doing that. And I
Right.
have friends who have done that, and they're not happy. We're made
Yeah.
to have good relationships, have lifelong relationships with people, and to work as part of a tribe, and to strive and achieve. And if you do this approach, you'll end up having more money than if you do it the selfish way, because you
Mm-hmm.
just get more out of everyone. The whole company performs better. It's more survivable. It's more sustainable. And you have a better financial outcome at the end, as opposed to
Mm-hmm.
a very selfish, I want to win the lottery and retire.
And even if you say you have a better financial result at the end, that's not. In some ways, this may be going too far, but in some ways, you almost get to the point of saying, I don't care so much about that. That wasn't what I was after all. It's nice that there was a financial benefit, but that's not the big deal.
It's not the big deal. The big deal is leaving a legacy, having a positive impact on the world, and feeling good at the end of the day, regardless of how much money you have, feeling satisfied that you made a contribution. I think
Right.
all human beings have a deep need to contribute to the tribe, and we also have a need to at times to be selfish, but I think um, we're really fundamentally made to help the tribe.
Yeah.
And,
Okay.
and so,
Now, Paul, I know that. I mean, this what's on the screen right now is sort of it's the long hard slog. It's the thing you've got to do every day. But you have an idea for something that you can do quickly to sort of turn on the cultural operating system. You want to talk about
yeah,
that?
yeah, yeah. This method right here on this slide, it takes 4 to 6 months to gain somebody's trust and to turn them from trading partners into allies. And so that's the slow way to connect to people. But there's also a rapid way. There's an instant way. You can actually create a trusting relationship instantly, and there's only one way to do it, and that's to go beyond the call of duty for your employees. And what I'd like to give you today as your homework is, in the next 6 months, I would like everybody listening to do this. Go beyond the call to duty 2 times. When an employee has an emergency, I want you to be a first responder. If I have a friend who's a CEO, and I was coaching him for 4 years. He was a wonderful guy, a wonderful leader. And one day at the health club, I said, Scott, I want you to take it to the next level. And he looked at me, huh? What do you mean? I said, well, if an employee has a house fire, I want you to save the family pet. And if an employee needs a kidney transplant, I want you to be the donor. And his eyes got really big, and he was like, what are you talking about? And I said, well, I'm exaggerating a little, but you kind of get my drift. That, you know, if you're there for your employees in their time of need, well, guess what? They're going to be on your side when it's your time of need. And that all of human motivation really kind of simplifies down to reciprocity. If you treat employees in an impersonal way, they're going to treat you impersonally. If you treat them as allies, they're going to treat you as allies. If you go beyond the call of duty for your employees on a regular basis, guess what? They're going to go beyond the call of duty for you. And that's simple logic, and you know, it's up to you. How do you want to manage your people? Do you want to make it impersonal, arm's length, coercive, lots of rules, or do you want to make it natural and organic, where you develop these true, meaningful relationships? And you know, I'd like to know, actually that'd be another poll question. How many of you are ready to invest the time and effort to create real relationships with your people?
And I think we won't take the time to do that poll because I'm watching the clock here as we sort of begin to wind down. And I want to make sure that you get to some of the real results that have been achieved by this sort of thing.
Okay.
But you're basically saying we need to wire people together into this network, right?
Yeah, and we don't just want to wire our employees and our managers together. We want to wire the employees to one another. And it's really a simple two-step process. To create these interpersonal wires, you have to first value the other person. Let's just take you and me for an example, Martin.
Yep.
We're going to create a wire between you and me, and you're going to tell me your story. And while you're telling me your story, I'm going to look for things that I admire about you, things that I think are pretty cool. And then I'm going to tell my story, and you're going to listen for things that you admire. And we've already had this exercise the other day. Actually, you told your story. I didn't tell much of my story. But anyway, that's...
you told pretty much. Yeah, we got to know each other. We've got a connection now.
Yeah, so we have a connection. And the next step is you got to invest in the relationship. If I have a problem, Martin, it's your problem. You're going to help me solve my problem. You're going to invest in my problem. And if you have a problem, it's my problem. I'm going to help you solve your problem. Right. And if we do that over about a 6-month period, we create a very intimate personal connection between us, where it's almost like it's not Paul and Martin anymore. It's like Paul Martin. I've incorporated you into my identity, and your successes feel like my successes, and my successes feel like your successes.
And my guess is that folks out there have had that experience. Let's put it this way. I hope that everybody's had that experience at some point in their life. Perhaps not in the workplace, but in some bond. Perhaps with a spouse, perhaps with a good friend, perhaps in the workplace. When it happens in the workplace, it's great. Been there a few times. Doesn't happen often, but yeah.
So if you want to connect the people, create the tribe, turn on the cultural operating system, you've got to encourage people to what I call mutually mentor one another, where you split everybody up into pairs, you get them to go through this two-step, value each other and then invest in each other. And you could even switch the pairings every 6 months. And over time, you're going to create a rich network of interpersonal connections through which knowledge and energy will flow, and things will get to the right places with the right people to get things done. And it'll just make your organization so much more effective and efficient if you connect your human supercomputers together with meaningful relationships.
And I'll say that in Paul's book, there's a lot more about this sort of thing, and clearly we're going to run out of time. So, Paul, I'm going to ask you to talk about what happened at Nucor, because that's a pretty interesting case study, and then we'll talk about a couple more.
Yeah, Nucor Steel is just a marvelous case study of a company that made this kind of tribal cultural operating system work. And it's a hugely successful company. The social architect of this was Ken Iverson, and he wrote a book called Plain Talk. Write it down, Plain Talk.
Okay.
Get that book and read it, because if you want to become the kind of leader who kind of creates this cultural dynamo, he'll tell you how to do it. And basically, this is the funny thing about Nucor. People would come from other steel companies wanting to work for Nucor, like from U.S. Steel or Bethlehem Steel. And they'd come in and they'd talk to Ken Iverson and they'd say, well, I'd like to look at your policy manual. And he'd go, well, sorry, but we don't have one of those. Our policy is do the right thing.
Mm-hmm.
And because they had this cultural network, everyone knew what the right thing was. You don't have to have a policy manual. People know what's the right. They're going to do the right thing because they believe in the company. They believe in one another. They want to impress their tribe. So they're just going to behave in a way naturally without a bunch of rules and regulations. And then the executive from Bethlehem Steel said, what about your job descriptions? And Ken Iverson looked down at his shoes and kind of looked sad. He goes, well, we really don't have that either. And the guy goes, well, how could you not have job descriptions? Well, we're pretty flexible about that. Our job description is do what needs to be done. Mm-hmm. And even if you're an engineer and you see that some guys are having trouble bricking one of the furnaces, you go over and help brick the furnace. You don't compartmentalize people too much because then everybody thinks that things like innovation is somebody else's job.
Yeah.
So he says, no, we're all in research and development. We all are expected to get ideas.
And Paul, I'll say that there are some questions coming in. In fact, there's been a question about sort of a union management environment, which we clearly are not going to have time to address today. So there's lots of things that you could talk about. But I do want you to talk a little bit about your experience directly with Daimler and with VCST, because the numbers, people who need hard numbers need to hear this.
Yeah, okay, well, here's some hard numbers. If you take care of the people side, and if you develop a kind of a leadership style that's personal, two examples. One is Daimler Financial Services in Mexico that had a 15-month project of coaching and actually using a software tool I developed. And after that 15 months, productivity had gone up 77%, and they had gone from 68th as the best place to work in Mexico to, I think, 24th. So they had a massive improvement in their productivity, and that's just an example of the sorts of outcomes you can have if you just get this people part halfway right. Another even better example is VCST, another factory in Mexico that makes gears for the automotive industry. They did a 15-month program with coaching and monitoring employee engagement, and their outcome was even better, 125% improvement in productivity. And their turnover went from 65% a year to 15%. So just imagine how much money that saved them, not having to retrain, hundreds of people every year. So those are just two examples of what happens if you get this right-brained, emotional people side right and turn on that cultural operating system.
So there really are some solutions out there that have real tangible results. This is not just touchy-feely anymore. This is based on science and is provable and has real results. That's great. So we're sort of, I'm sorry, we're kind of running out of time. We could talk about so much more here, but I really appreciate it. And I want to encourage people to think very hard about this untapped resource that's on the right side of people's brains. And really, Paul, you've given us a lot to think about today, and I appreciate it. I know we didn't get to all the questions. I've seen them coming in here. We've barely scratched the surface. So let me just offer perhaps some resources as we wind down here that may help. First of all, I want to say that we will provide access to this recording, the recording of this webinar, free. We'll have it up within 48 hours of the conclusion of this broadcast, just in a minute here. And so look for an email following up with information on how to access the material. It'll be in your inbox when you come to work Monday morning, if not before. And the recording contains both the audio and the video portion, and you're free to share that link with anybody you want that is struggling with motivation and understanding this sort of left brain, right brain kind of thinking. We'll be happy to provide that resource if you get in touch with us. Secondly, we've put together a toolkit, and this is kind of exciting to me. I wanted to really make sure we got to this. If you so desire, you can purchase a Leading with Both Sides of the Brain toolkit, and it includes a copy of Paul's book, Primal Management. We'll send you one of those, and even better, it gives you some time with Paul himself, so you can actually have a half-hour consultation with Paul as an advising session to sort of think through the right brain approach to business. This would be a great opportunity for you. Sort of imagine continuing this conversation on topics that are specific and pertinent to your situation. We'll include a white paper by Paul that talks about the Daimler-Chrysler story and how they improved their results by 77%. And of course, we'll have the recording of this webinar, but we'll also throw in the slides that you can use in PDF format if you want to use them with other folks in your organization. So lots of items in the toolkit delivered using the Leaders Ought to Know learning system, which is the same web-based system that we use to provide the videos and so forth that come as part of Leaders Ought to Know. And then finally, I would be remiss if I did not point out that the full Leaders Ought to Know Leadership Development Initiative is certainly available. The second year of Leaders Ought to Know is devoted specifically to the secrets of human motivation. And each month, your leaders would receive a new video discussing a different aspect of motivation. We cover Maslow, like we talked about today, other behaviorists, rooting everything in research. And then on a weekly basis, your folks get an integrated learning activity that reinforces the topic of the month. So we actually try to get employees engaged. We kind of practice what we're trying to preach here. We also offer on-site and other self-learning methods to develop your supervisors and managers. Lots of things going on. You can find out more at leadersoughttoknow.com. So, as I need to wrap up here because we've run out of time, so much more we can talk about, Paul. But if you would like more information, you can contact us by the methods that are on the screen right now. And Paul, let me just personally say, this has been great. This is fascinating. And I'm sure that the folks listening have really appreciated your insights. So I want to express my personal thanks to you for being willing to share this today.
Okay.
So thanks, everyone. I appreciate your attention today. I'm confident we're giving you lots of things to think about. And I know you'll agree that how to lead with both sides of your brain is the kind of thing that leaders ought to know.